Christianity, though powerful, was not the only religious movement flourishing across the vast expanse of the Roman Empire. Around the 1st century CE, another deity, Mithras, began to attract numerous followers, giving rise to a distinct religious movement that endured for several centuries before fading away entirely by the 5th century. The so-called Mithraic cult is among the least understood and, unfortunately, most distorted of ancient religions. Part of this confusion stems from Mithras being inadvertently drawn into heated debates about the historicity of Jesus. Some scholars have claimed that both Mithras and Jesus derive from a universal archetype of the divine Savior, sharing traits such as a birth on December 25th, a virgin birth, or having 12 disciples. A recent statement, for example, went something like this. Here's the Persian god Mithras, 600 years before Christ, born on December 25th, performing miracles, resurrected on the 3rd day, known as the Lamb, the Way, the Truth, the Light, the Savior Messiah. However, this cascade of assertions must be halted immediately. In reality, all these claims, such as those made by Bill Maher, are entirely false. While Maher is undoubtedly a gifted political satirist, questions of ancient history are best left to specialists. The cult of Mithras did indeed emerge during the same period as Christianity's rise. Both movements existed within the same cultural milieu and shared sociological features common to late Roman religion. Yet the notion that Mithras and Christ were cut from the same cloth is nothing more than unfounded speculation. Setting aside sensationalist theories like those in the Zeitgeist films, we should instead turn to archaeological evidence, which reveals one of antiquity's most intriguing religious phenomena. What do we actually know about the Mithraic cult, and what mutual influence, if any, did it have on Christianity? The cult of Mithras was a religious movement that arose in Rome around the 1st century CE, centered on the worship of a Romanized version of the Persian deity Mithras. He was typically depicted as a man in Persian attire slaying a bull. By the 3rd century CE, this worship had spread widely across the Roman Empire, from Britain to North Africa and from the Black Sea to Syria, but by the 5th century, it had vanished. Before proceeding further, it's important to clarify that the Mithraic cult was a new religious movement within the Roman Empire. This may seem confusing given that the god Mithras himself traces back to an ancient Indo-Iranian deity of the same name, who predates the Roman cult by centuries. Mithras is merely the Hellenized form of this older god. Evidence from northern India and Iran shows that this deity was already worshipped as early as the 2nd millennium BCE. By the 5th century BCE, Persians revered him as a solar god, and within the dualistic framework of Zoroastrianism, Mithra was the god of light, eternally battling darkness. The Roman historian Strabo acknowledged this connection, noting that Mithras was the Persian word for the sun. Because of this link to the ancient Indo-Iranian deity, early 20th century scholars assumed the Roman Mithraic cult was simply an imported Persian religion, brought to the empire by soldiers returning from campaigns in the Near East. Historian Franz Kumal championed this view, believing that Roman theology directly borrowed from Iranian sources. Consequently, he studied ancient Zoroastrian texts to fill gaps in the Roman evidence. However, modern scholars have largely rejected this theory. The Roman cult of Mithras shows no clear precedents in Iranian religion. As leading expert Manfred Klaus succinctly put it, yes, the initiates of Mithras in the Roman Empire worshipped a god inspired by the Persian Mithra, and they used some Persian terms in their rituals, but we are dealing with a Roman religion, and we must treat it as such. This brings us to the evidence, and here lies a major challenge. There are no surviving writings from actual Roman devotees of Mithras. No narratives, mythologies, origin stories, or theological treatises exist. Anyone claiming otherwise is either mistaken or citing older Persian texts that likely had no influence on the Roman cult. Aside from brief mentions by Roman historians like Strabo and Porphyry, and a few polemical references by early Christian writers such as Justin Martyr, our only evidence for the Roman Mithraic cult comes from archaeology, inscriptions, mosaics, sculptures, and the meeting places themselves, called mithraea. Archaeologists have uncovered these underground sanctuaries throughout the Mediterranean, attesting to the religion's widespread presence. Mithraea vary in design, but share common features. They are narrow, rectangular rooms, often built underground with vaulted ceilings, and typically quite small, most only about 10 meters long. These spaces were designed for one of the cult's central rituals, the sacred communal meal. Ritual banquets were a hallmark of late Roman religious life and played a prominent role in Mithraism as well. The Christian Eucharist is a well-known parallel, and some early Christian authors even claimed the Mithraic meal was a demonic parody of their own sacrament. A famous relief from Bosnia vividly shows Mithraic initiates gathered around a table with a plate of bread. Notably, every Mithraeum featured a central image of Mithras slaying the bull, a scene Manfred Klaus interprets as portraying Mithras as the host of this sacred feast. Remarkably, this iconography appears consistently across the Mediterranean with little variation. Mithras, turning his head away as he plunges a dagger into the bull, is often accompanied by a dog, snake, scorpion, and raven observing the act. Crucially, there is no evidence that Mithraic initiates actually sacrificed bulls. The scene likely symbolized a foundational myth in Mithraic belief, but its precise meaning remains unknown due to the absence of written narratives from the cult's own followers. Scholars must reconstruct the myth from fragmented archaeological data. While Kumau interpreted the tauroctony, bull-slaying scene, as a Zoroastrian cosmological myth, later researchers favor an astrological reading, supported by the abundance of celestial imagery in many Mithraea. For instance, the Mithraeum of the Seven Spheres in Ostia features zodiac signs on its benches, leading some to suggest that initiates viewed the Mithraeum as a microcosm of the universe. The cult's organizational structure was initiatory, requiring rituals for entry and advancement through a hierarchy of ranks. The Christian writer Saint Jerome mentions 7 grades, corroborated by mosaic floor decorations in the Ostia Mithraeum near Rome. Initiates began as ravens, then progressed through bridegroom, soldier, lion, Persian, heliodromus, runner of the sun, and finally, father. Notably, all surviving inscriptions bear exclusively male names, strongly suggesting women were excluded. The cult was especially popular among Roman soldiers. Many dedicatory inscriptions appear to be military in origin. One inscription, found beneath the church of Santo Stefano Rotondo in Rome, was made by 2 men, one a priest of a local military garrison, the other an equestrian, a lower-ranking aristocrat. Yet inscriptions from across the empire show that men from all social strata, politicians, merchants, and even slaves joined the cult. That said, the cult was far from egalitarian. While slaves could be initiated, there's no evidence they advanced far in the hierarchy. The rank of lion appears to have been the most common, implying few reached the higher levels. Social superiors, like centurions, would not have tolerated lower-ranking soldiers outranking them in religious status. Thus, despite its innovative structure, the Mithraic hierarchy ultimately reinforced Rome's rigid social stratification. Details about the rituals required for advancement are scarce, as initiates kept them secret. Hence, scholars often label Mithraism a mystery cult. Other mystery cults in the Roman world included those of Isis and the Great Mother. However, Mystery should not imply total secrecy or social isolation. Some mithraea were located in public buildings. One lies within the Baths of Caracalla in Rome, another in the Crypta Balbi, a large residential complex. Thus, neighbors likely knew about the gatherings and may even have known participants. The cult's secrecy was probably limited to its inner rites, not its existence. With this basic understanding in place, we can now address the relationship between Mithraism and Christianity. Both flourished from roughly the 1st century CE onward, a coincidence that has fueled much speculation. It's therefore essential to first dispel the myths popularized by figures like Bill Maher. First, the claim that Mithras was born of a virgin is false. No texts from Mithraic followers exist, so there are no birth narratives comparable to those in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke. Instead, sculptures depict Mithras emerging from a rock, holding a torch and dagger. The myth behind this rock birth remains unknown, but calling the rock a virgin is a clear distortion. The idea of a virgin rock is inherently nonsensical. Similarly, the notion that Mithras had 12 disciples is unfounded. While he is sometimes shown surrounded by the zodiac signs, labeling them disciples is a gross misinterpretation. This reflects an astrological worldview, not a parallel to Jesus' apostles. Other claims, that Mithras died on a cross, held a Last Supper, or was visited by magi bearing gold, frankincense, and myrrh, lack any ancient textual or archaeological support. These ideas originated with 18th and 19th century pseudo-historians like Godfrey Higgins, 1836, and T.W. Doane, late 1800s, who offered no sources and likely invented them outright. Thus, assertions of a shared mythological foundation between Jesus and Mithras stem from outdated, unverified claims, not historical evidence. These 2-century-old rumors persist only because few bother to consult actual sources. Archaeological study of Mithraism shows none of these parallels hold up. The one claim with partial validity is the shared date of December 25th. Emperor Aurelian did establish this day as the festival of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, in the 3rd century. Since Mithras was sometimes identified with the sun and called invincible, some associate him with this celebration. However, this merely reflects competition among Roman religious groups for symbolic dates, or Christian efforts to co-opt a popular festival. It does not imply a common mythological origin for Jesus and Mithras. Having dispelled these myths, what can we say about the actual relationship between Christianity and Mithraism? They did share some similarities, but these are best explained by their shared Roman cultural context. Both held communal meals in small meeting spaces, a common practice among Roman cults. While Justin Martyr saw the Mithraic banquet as a demonic imitation of the Eucharist, the two groups were likely drawing on the same broader religious conventions, not copying each other. The theological meaning of their meals almost certainly differed. In Dura Europos, for example, a Christian house church stood directly across from a Mithraeum, evidence of parallel, not derivative development. Yet, interactions were not always peaceful. Christian writers like Justin Martyr and Tertullian denounced Mithraism as demonic. In some cases, Christians actively vandalized Mithraea. At Hawarte in Syria, Christian graffiti was scratched onto the walls of a Mithraeum before a church was built atop it. Similarly, defaced Mithraic images in the Mithraeum beneath Santa Prisca in Rome suggest deliberate Christian destruction. By the 4th century, Mithraea were increasingly abandoned, with few new ones constructed. Why? Scholar and archaeologist David Ulansey note, the original text likely refers to David Ulansey or another specialist. Walsh may be a misattribution. Argues that multiple factors contributed. Christianity, bolstered by imperial patronage after Constantine, became dominant, something Mithraic communities couldn't match. Many Mithraists likely converted. Additionally, worship of a Persian god may have become unpopular during Rome's wars with Persia. Border mithraea may have been destroyed during barbarian invasions, as many lay outside late Roman fortifications. Finally, some mithraea were simply left intact, suggesting gradual loss of interest rather than violent suppression. In short, no single cause explains Mithraism's decline.
A combination of Christian ascendancy, political shifts, military conflicts, vandalism, and waning devotion likely led to its disappearance. Yet the cult remains one of antiquity's most fascinating religious enigmas. For those interested in learning more, first-hand engagement with archaeological evidence is essential. When encountering sensational claims about Mithras, it's wise to consult reliable scholarship. This overview draws heavily on Manfred Klaus' indispensable The Roman Cult of Mithras and Roger Beck's The Religion of the Mithraic Mysteries in the Roman Empire. Klaus's book is especially accessible to general readers. Special thanks go to archaeologist David Ulanzi for his generous assistance and feedback. As always, thank you for watching. If you'd like to support this work, consider visiting our Patreon page. Until next time.